I believe we have a quorum at this point. We're still waiting for representatives from Stantec, but we can go ahead and get started, I believe.
All right, Craig, do you want to go on and read our COVID
Certainly, will do. Thank you.
mission, please?
So due to the COVID-19 pandemic and state of emergency, this meeting is being held via live video teleconference pursuant to 2020 Senate Bill 150 and in accordance with KRS 61826 because it's not feasible to offer a primary physical location for the meeting. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Has everybody had a chance to look at their minutes from our last meeting?
Yeah.
And are there any questions or concerns? If not, do I hear a motion to approve?
So moving.
Or
Second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, minutes approved. Great. Craig, are our folks here yet? So we can move on?
It looks like Mark Butler is in the room. Mark, is everyone from your team here that you need here for the presentation?
To get started, yes, Joe Herman will join us a little bit later for his presentation after Mrs. Albright's or Miss Albright's. But for the time being, we're here.
Excellent.
Okay,
Thank
great. Has everybody had a chance to look at the link that was sent out by Craig with all the information on it?
Yes.
Great, great, wonderful. Mark, you want to proceed?
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. So today we have two items to present to you all. The first is our vacant land inventory analysis. Obviously, it's preliminary. We want to get your feedback. We have done a lot of slicing and dicing and looking at it from different angles, and there are some points where we want to get some explicit, feedback from you all, but we expect this will be a relatively organic conversation that'll proceed as we go through the slides. So feel free to ask questions as we go through it. And then our second presentation is a little bit of a departure in the sense that it's kind of tangential, but I think it's relevant. It's a description of the CAP program and the CTIMS system for understanding sewer capacity. And Joe Herman, who works for Stantec and is the manager of that program, will give us that brief overview, and we'll try to tie it back into how we're planning to use it for this analysis. But for today, I mean, my hope and goal is that we can kind of cross this bridge about what we consider in the vacant land inventory, and therefore make that the foundation for moving forward with the rest of our analysis. Just a little housekeeping note, there was a question that Craig asked me if we had received and used or in using the housing study, housing demand study that was put out a couple years ago, including from LBAR, and the answer is definitely an emphatic yes. We are using it as the basis for understanding particularly our affordable housing demand and as a framework for not only what is there today, but also how we would do it going forward. So we are using that study. We also have more data that that LBAR is going to be giving us on the state of housing sales at the present time. And so just want to make clear that we are using that study, and it'll be a integral part of our framework. Otherwise, let's go ahead and get started, and I'll turn it over to Cynthia, and again, please feel free to ask questions as we go through the slides.
Anne, Greg, Mark, if I could ask a question.
Sure.
You talked about the housing study that speaks to affordable housing. Have you all looked at the Gatton College study that was done in 2017? It's called The Economic Impacts of Land Use Policies in Lexington, Kentucky.
No, if that could be provided to us, I'd love to.
Sure, I'll drop the link into the chat box if that's
great.
convenient, or I can email it to Craig. I think it's an important piece of research that really does inform this process. And I think if all the task force members have time, I think it's a good read. I think it would be really helpful.
I appreciate all the information anybody would like us to look at and review. Like, please, we are looking at like a, a wide spectrum of things. I am not an expert in all of these things. I try to I try to absorb what people give me, and we'll try to put it to good use. So thank you very much.
Sure.
Okay, everybody, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see where it is. I apologize. I have tremendous difficulties when I'm there we go. I'm going to put this in presentation mode. And tell me, everybody, is it coming through?
Yes.
Okay, well, since we've gone through the agenda, we're going to just jump right into it. I'm not going to go too fast, but I realize there's a lot of data on these slides that you've all taken a look at. We do have a time constraint, so by all means, please don't hesitate to interrupt me, but I'm going to try to just walk you through the process that we've gone through in order to get to the information that we've developed, trying to understand, where there is opportunity and where there is further analysis to be done. So one thing, this is a spreadsheet snapshot. We have been aggregating data, as we've talked about before, from a wide variety of sources, thanks to David O'Neill for providing some PVA data tables that we aggregated together so that we can look at, the 98,000 parcels that are inside the urban service boundary and look at them in a complete picture. And one of the reasons why I have difficulty when I'm on my laptop is because I have a monitor that's 52 inches wide, and that allows me to look at these spreadsheets in this large format. And that's one of the reasons why I get to have that monitor, is because I'm constantly looking at, numerous dozens and dozens and dozens of columns. But that allows us as a planning professional team to look at what is the zoning, what is the land use code, make sure that the description is in fact that it's vacant, is it developed, how is it developed, is there a specific type of use on it? Because in this kind of data, you will see quite often that there are inconsistencies. And so we use this information to try to rectify those inconsistencies. And so the first part is to understand who owns these parcels that we're potentially coding as vacant, and what the land uses in the zoning are, and then of course if they're developed, how they're developed. So this is the first part of the spreadsheet, and this is the second part that shows you that we are looking at, the year built and how many units are there, what the building type is, and whether or not the land and improvement values, how do they correlate to each other, that type of information. So our first summary table is, how much of all of this land that we are working with inside the urban service boundary is in fact developed. And we find that 77% of it is. So our real focus today is to talk about how we came up with the agriculture/vacant property, and what does that look like in terms of its various land use and zoning classifications. So out of all the analysis, we have come up with a total of 5,045 acres of vacant land, which represents 11% of the total. Now there are parcels within the urban service boundary that I've coded as other, and those tend to fall in that category of residential, HOA, green space, open space, government properties, parking lots. Those types of uses constitute 10% of the total breakdown, and for purposes of this first cut, we are assuming that they are other and they are not to be considered for future development. That's just for this first cut though. With some data that we got from Chris Woodall and the planning department, Mark did a great job of going through and identifying properties that are in transition. So they're not developed yet, they're certainly not vacant. We used Google Earth to identify, not only his local knowledge, but, the mass grading that's going on there. And we've coded those differently so we can keep them in a different bucket and make sure that we're not assigning new development to property that currently from PVA data is vacant, but in fact, it has development plans that are going on. And that constitutes another 1,000 acres and just 2% of the total. So with that, we're moving forward with, what does that look like? So visually, this is how we've coded and how it looks from a geographic perspective, where the developed properties are, obviously throughout the urban service boundary, and then the vacant are the green areas. And so what's important is that you see that the vast majority of these larger parcels are certainly on the periphery and up against the urban service boundary. Those that are vacant, that are inside the new circle area, are very small parcels in size, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail. But the importance is that you can see from the other category, there's a lot of property within the urban service boundary that does fall within that category. And then all of those properties that are in transition. And so on the table here on the right, underneath the legend, I've explained, what other includes golf courses, public service, telecom, governmental. So those are why they are coded as other and probably shouldn't be considered as potential sources for future development. And then again, what the total acreage is, which is 45,664 within the urban service boundary.
Cynthia, can I stop you right there?
Please.
Just to be clear about the properties in transition, this is like stuff that, some of it is, anecdotal. We understand, just from, conversations like the University of Kentucky dairy farm property is currently being transferred to the city and will be, transitioned into an industrial park style facility. We added like the Spring Valley Golf Course simply because it is now no longer, its future is no longer likely to be a golf course, the Baptist Health Campus, etc. And I also included, like, as Cynthia said, properties where we could see mass grading is occurring, demonstration that the development is clearly underway. But it does not include all the residential vacant property in particular that has a development plan that will likely, put it into process of getting developed in the near future. This is to be more of either it's changing its particular land use, or it's literally in process, physically in process. So there's a lot of other land that the city provided us data for like, their the development plans that are on file. I went through a lot of the Acela portal, trying to find out more details about those. But for this transition cut, it is more of like a unique outlier properties that we want to just keep an eye on to make sure that as we go forward, we are correctly attributing what there's not only their status, but what they are likely to be.
Right, and of course, we'll be distributing, those that are vacant and those that are in transition, and maybe some that are even, a few that are in the other category, into those three scenarios. So the idea is that we properly code them from the beginning, and in the attribute table, we've identified what the proposed land uses are for them, so that we will have a better understanding of how much we can absorb after we finish the market study that MXD is doing, and how much we're going to be assigning to the various scenarios as we work through that process.
Mark and Christine, this is Ann. Got a quick question for you.
Sure.
On the golf courses that you have in there, we've had one that's been kind of in flux for a while, the Andover Golf Course, that they are thinking about developing, not developing. I don't know if that's in your mix somewhere. Do you remember that name?
Oh yeah, I am aware of the golf course you're speaking of. At this point, it is probably in the other. I think I can see it in the other over there. We would probably need a little bit more firm a demonstration that it is in fact transferring to be considered in the vacant category. As of right now, it's that I don't. I mean, Spring Valley is more clear in that regard. But yeah, we'll keep an eye on it.
Okay,
Hey,
thank you.
And we've already developed part of that. We've already developed part of Andover.
The golf course?
Yes, we've already developed part of it. Or in
So-
the process.
Yeah, that was a Dennis Anderson project.
Yes, that's
Right.
exactly right.
There's
Okay,
several
so-
hundred acres.
So is the rest of it able to be developed, or do we know?
At this time, The neighborhood association owns it, and they have no intention of developing it.
Okay.
I
And what-
purchased 20 acres of it.
Oh, did you? Good. Okay. All righty. Thank you for clearing that up. I didn't know where that stood.
Thanks, Dennis.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. Next slide. So what we've done is just identify the vacant land by use category, land use category, just to start to get an understanding of how these vacant properties sort of fall within these larger uses. And you can see here on the table that we have about 60% of all the total vacant land in the either in the vacant or agricultural category. And then a 20-20 split between commercial and residential, with a very small amount in that other non-qualifying categories that are generally in the residential use. But it's an even split between commercial and residential that's vacant when you're looking at it from a land use perspective. And in our conversations with planning, you know, we have vacant, and then we have all of the agricultural uses that may or may not be in use right now, but we've coded them as vacant per that direction. And this is how this looks spatially on the map. Again, we've included the properties that are in transition here with a hatch pattern, just to see what their underlying, so you all can see what their underlying uses are relative to contributing to the amount of land that we have that's either in a commercial and a residential or in the vacant agricultural uses. And like Mark said, some of these, you know, are areas that are well established with plans that are moving forward to some degree, and others are not quite as well defined, but we've included everything here from a land use perspective so that we can apply the market economic analysis to them and figure out how much we have and how much we're going to need over time based on historical trends. I think I'd like to also point out that you can see here, you know, this yellow color is all of the vacant residential, and that's inside the New Circle Road. And you can see that there are very, very small parcels. And then the few remaining large parcels are on the outside of New Circle Road. And they have a hatch pattern over them as well. So that development land residential classification in the data, I've put a hatch pattern over that because it's really important. They are the larger parcels that are available for development, as opposed to residential uses that have already been platted and vacant, but already have a lot associated with them. So these are the areas that provide the greatest opportunity for new master plan development communities.
Excuse me, Christine. Craig, Don Robinson is locked out.
Uh-oh.
Can you get him in?
Thank
Because
you.
of his age.
Mark, is that something you can help out with?
No, I'm just along for the ride here.
I think Craig can get it.
Okay, good.
Thank you. I apologize.
No, it's fine. Should I wait a little bit until you can get back in, or would you like me to continue?
I would, you can go ahead and continue. He's not on the attendees list, so he must
Oh,
not
okay.
get into the meeting at all. So I'll see if
Oh,
I
okay.
can send him a link.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so
Craig, he's under Rika. His girlfriend's name's Rika. He just chatted with the group, commenting about Frank's comments. So
Got it.
trying to get in under Rika.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Craig, I just put him in.
Thank you.
So this is how it looks in terms of vacant land by zoning classification. And so you can see the nice thing about looking at both the land use and the vacant is the vacant classification gives us a much greater understanding of how it actually breaks down, you know, by specific use type. And again, these numbers here on this chart do not include all of the acreage that would be associated with a land that's been designated in transition, but we will be including those acreages in each of these use categories as we build out our scenarios 1 through 3. But the important thing is just to understand the magnitude and the relationship between them and how much we have in any one of these categories. And what they present in terms of opportunities for future development within the urban service boundary. I need to move this over. Okay, on the bottom. So next slide. This is how this sort of looks visually, where we have a lot more information about those vacant properties and how they occur. They're obviously in the same places, but the information is greater for us when we look at the zoning classification in order to understand the absorption rates and the demands for future uses within the urban service boundary for industrial, residential, commercial, and those types of other uses that we will be analyzing to accommodate future growth. When we look at the vacant land, one of the things that was important, it seems that the size of the parcel and how that measures up is quite important. And what this graphic shows you is, if you look from top to bottom, the y-axis is the parcel size. How small are these parcels and how large are these parcels? And what this shows you in one fell swoop is that we have a large number of parcels that are in the vacant classification, but their size is very, very small, 0 to 0.25, so less than 1/4 of an acre. And then on the right, I've created a little table that shows you what their actual average size across all of those parcels. And so we have a lot of parcels that are in a very small range. They definitely fall within that residential vacant use zoning classification. And then we have a very low number of parcels that actually fall within that larger 5, 10, and 25 acre land use category for purposes of development. The nice thing is when we do get to over the 25 acres, the average size is quite large, but as this blue shows you, the number of them is exceedingly small. And so the blue shows the actual number of parcels relative to the total amount that are vacant, and the green shows you the amount of acres that we have in each of these size categories. So we have lots and lots of parcels that make up a very small number in a very small parcel size, and very few parcels that make up a large number in the large parcel size. I have to move this, my monitor is so tiny. When we look at vacant residential a little bit more in depth, we see that we were just curious, okay, from a residential zoning perspective, what do we really have that's available for new development? And you can see that the largest category is in R3 with 734 total acres that's available, and relatively small numbers that are in the R1A, R1E, T, and R2 and R5. So, the R3, one thing that happens consistently is that when you enter into those R2, 3, and 4 zoning classifications, the parcel sizes get incrementally smaller and smaller. I don't know how you all feel about R3, but certainly that's the area where you have the most significant amount of development going forward, with 734 total acres available in that zoning classification. This slide looks at it slightly different, same as with the other information, where we stack the acreage that's available in each of those uses with the total number of parcels. So in the vacant residential lotting classification, you see that we have a very small number of acres, but it makes up a huge number of available parcels. So these are parcels that have been platted and available for new development, but not available necessarily for, they're not available at all for any master planning or new community development. These are vacant parcels within existing subdivisions. They might be subdivisions that were developed 10 years ago. They might be subdivisions that are currently under construction. There's quite a few of those, but for the most part, we see a lot of vacant lots inside the New Circle Road that have been there for a very long time. And then, of course, Code 505, which is the residential development land, we have a lot of acreage, but a very small number of parcels. So there's not a lot of opportunity here for a wide variety of new residential developers to come to town, because there's just not a lot of parcels that are available. They're held or they're available to a very small number of folks, but they constitute, you know, almost over 500 acres of land that is available for new development. From an industrial perspective, I know that's kind of an important piece of information for the folks at Commerce Lex. I looked a little bit more carefully at the industrial, again, from a size perspective. And you can see from the chart, if I could just move this out of the way so I could see the chart. Again, it's a similar situation where we have a large number of small parcels that are vacant in the I1 and I2 zoning classification, but the total acreage is relatively small comparatively. We have a far larger parcels that are available, but the number of parcels is exceedingly small. So the largest category in terms of acreage is within that 1 to 5 acre classification, which is smaller than the folks that Commerce Lex would like. You know, their target audience is 5 acres or larger. In that particular case, we don't have very many acres, and we certainly have far fewer parcels. So this is an area where all of the, well, certainly the new dairy farm, the dairy farm that's coming in will help fill that gap. But there are other, you know, opportunities that we're going to need to be looking for, depending on how the analysis shakes out with respect to the market research, with, you know, future demand to fulfill that need, that market need.
Cynthia, may I ask
Please.
a quick question, clarifying question?
Sure.
If someone owns the same parcel or adjoining parcels and both are vacant, are we counting, like, for example, we own a residential parcel that are next to each other, and they're both vacant, but they're each very, very small. Would they be considered 2 parcels in this data, or would they be considered 1 parcel if it has the same owner and they're adjoining and both vacant?
They would be considered 2 parcels in this data, but going forward, assuming that we, you know, have the blessing of the committee with sort of the analysis that we've done thus far, I will definitely be looking at the adjoining ownership of parcels, because what we want to do is understand that, because those adjoining parcels are going to be the ones that develop first. Or maybe in scenario 1 and 2, simply because they provide a larger parcel with which to work with. So for sure, we will be considering adjacency and ownership in the next cut, but right now it would be 2 parcels.
Great, thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. One of the things that we wanted to do is kind of look at, you know, the various sub areas within Lexington, and look carefully at, you know, how does the vacant property sort of align with these boundaries that were defined in a previous study. And so I coded all the parcels to be included into one of these zones. And then I looked at the data to figure out, okay, where is the vacant property within each of these zones? And you can see that the numbers of available properties within the downtown and town central, north and south, and the southwest are all very, very small compared to the land that's in the east, north, south, and northwest. So again, the available land is on the periphery, not within the immediate downtown urban core area within the New Circle Road area that we have. Looking at the developed parcels in conjunction with the vacant parcels by zoning classification, what I wanted to show you is how we measure up in terms of various residential classifications. You know, what proportion of the overall available land falls within these classifications compared to what's existing today. And you can see that, you know, R1C is the predominant development pattern from a residential perspective. And the available land within that category is very, very small. And I can't even see my own table because everybody's faces are hiding that. But I have to keep moving around my little window so I can read my own chart because my monitor is so small. In any event, you can see how the available land for future development compares to the development pattern that exists today within the city, and that the amount of land that's available is, you know, very, very small compared to its existing development pattern. Again, remember R3 was one where we had quite a large number of available acres by comparison, which we do, but R1C is the predominant development pattern that we have today in the city of Lexington. And again, that's probably because it's the most popular parcel size. And again, there's very little development potential in that particular zoning classification.
Could I ask a question?
Please.
So your assumption is that this land cannot and will not be rezoned?
No, not at all. I'm not assuming that. I'm just telling you from the current perspective today with the data that's available, with understanding how the city has developed. I'm not saying that there won't be any rezonings to a different classification, maybe R1C or R3. I'm not saying that that won't happen and that more R1C or R3 won't occur in any one of those properties that are in transition or on any of the vacant parcels. I'm just telling you what the current status is to help guide everybody on this is what your community looks like from a residential perspective, and this is obviously where there's a demand, and so we need to figure out ways to best address that going forward.
But rezoning is one of the ways to address it, right?
Yep,
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
May I ask
Okay.
another question for either Jim or Chris Woodall, Jim Duncan or Chris Woodall? Can you remind us, please, of what the lot sizes are, minimum lot sizes for these zoning classifications?
Jim Duncan here. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. This is Jim Duncan, Director of Planning. And just a bit of a explanation, and I wouldn't expect Cynthia to know this necessarily because this is certainly something peculiar to the community. But R3 is the predominant new zoning that has been requested for about 30 years for most residential properties because it is the most flexible, not only in terms of lot size, but also land use. R1C would be more of a legacy land use pattern. Probably was very popular and certainly through the 70s perhaps, but R3 is by far the one that most people choose now. To answer Dr. Phillips' question, the R3, or I'm sorry, the R1C, there's a lot of parameters, but this kind of gives you an idea. The minimum lot size in an R1C is 8,000 square feet, and the minimum lot frontage is 60 feet. Not much different for R3. The minimum lot size is 6,000 square feet with a minimum lot frontage of 50 feet. But the real difference is in R3, you can also have different land use types, including townhouses and apartments. So it gives much more flexibility to a developer than the R1C, which is just single family detached housing.
And that would explain, Jim, why it's popular, because it has greater flexibility.
It would explain,
absolutely.
yes, absolutely. Yep. Greater flexibility, and you can go down to, you can get more housing for your land with the minimum lot size being smaller than the R1C.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also like to clarify or just restate, I suppose, that that's why the three scenarios that we have proposed or moving forward with include in scenario one, a more literal interpretation of the zoning code as it is, so we can get a baseline of how this would develop out if we kept the zoning codes the way they are. And then, scenario two would incorporate the type of land zoning changes and perhaps even some reclassifications that are currently under consideration that would allow even greater flexibility for accommodating the needs that we see needing to be accommodated. But yeah, the assumption is zoning stays the same for scenario one, and it changes for scenarios 2 and 3. or can be changed for 2 and 3.
Yes. Okay, moving on. So this is where I looked at the parcel sizes for the various land use classifications and how many parcels are available for development prior to any, without considering any rezoning that's currently available, you know, within the various classifications as they are zoned today. So looking at this, you'll see on the left, you've got that 0 to 0.25 parcel size. And then how many of those parcels we have total within each of these categories. And so obviously the largest number by far, you know, by, you know, almost 1,000%, is in the 0 to 0.25 size range. And that translates into, I don't have my calculator, but I think it's 0.25 times 40. I did this yesterday, I should know. That's 10,000 square feet. So
Yeah.
This is where you have, you know, they're smaller than that. This is the upper end, but the point is this is where that R3 generally size, you know, fits into everything that's smaller than that, the 8,000, 6,000 square foot lot size. So we have a large number of parcels that are within that smaller range category, and then we have, you know, obviously a decreasing number of parcels that are in those larger lot sizes. But the important thing is that when you have 41 parcels that are in that over 5 acres, this is where a developer can come in and, you know, do something that is, you know, custom to the type of product that they like to build. Looking at the vacant lots by size, I actually coded them so you could see where they are and how many that there are in each of those categories. And so we have approximately 257 vacant parcels that are in the very smallest of categories, which are 0.5, which is 2,100 and so square feet, and then increasing in size as you go down the list. So I went from, you know, 2,100 square feet to 4,000 square feet to that 8,700 square feet and larger. And the important thing is that most of these parcels are all within that downtown, north portion of downtown. That little inset there just shows you the concentration of all these small parcels. Again, I haven't taken into consideration the adjacency and ownership issues, which obviously create larger parcels, but the point is that this is where they are, and then the larger parcels are outside, for the most part, are outside the New Circle Road area, with some in the southeast and some in the southwest of the city.
Cynthia, would it be possible for you to enlarge that screen so that we can take a little bit closer look?
Sure, let's see if I can do that. Let me see. Can you see that?
Yes.
Does that help?
Yes. And I also wanted to see the, you know, at the county, at the inside the urban services
Sure.
boundary scale. But these
Yeah.
are all basically, you know, historic lots that were platted, kind of working class era lots that have probably, David O'Neill probably knows, or Jim or Chris would know the age. So these are lots that have been platted probably since the 1950s, 60s.
I would say that is correct. Yes. Yes.
This is, you know, this is Mark. I mean, I think this is a demonstration of just the land use development patterns of the eras in which these areas were plotted. Obviously, downtown, you know, it was plotted more first, and you know, smaller, shorter frontages were more feasible or practical 100 years ago. And as we you know, developed a more suburban pattern, you can see the larger, greener parcels are outside that pattern. But you can also see in the that northeast corner there where those are you know, new development lots that are, you know, a part of other you know larger subdivisions that are yet to be developed, and those are smaller parcels based on the developments that are out there.
Right. These are that in that sweet spot of that 8,700 square feet or smaller. that are out here in these areas and subdivisions that are currently underway. But the largest number of them do fall within this area right here. And so we will be looking at those for, intensification and or, redevelopment to contribute to the housing and other types of use demands, in scenarios 2 and 3.
Excellent. Thank you. That's really
You're
helpful.
welcome. I mean, I just think that just looking at them, you can kind of see that, there's a lot of them and there's a tremendous amount of development potential here. It's just a question of ownership and contiguous areas that a developer would want to come in. And a lot of times they come in, and I don't want to speak for the development community on the phone, but, my experience is they quietly buy up a few and then they assemble them, and then there's something that they can do there. But, certainly when I look at estimating demand and absorption over time, which is part of our analysis, in the various scenarios, I'm always looking at all of those parcels, whether they be small or not so small. I'm looking at who owns them, particularly is it an LLC? And if it's, if it's Cynthia and Jim Albright, I'm going to give them a little bit less of I'm going to give them a longer time period with which to develop than I am an LLC. I'm going to definitely put all of those businesses that are in the business of development, first in the priority. So they'll come first in scenario 2 versus, those that are just owned by an individual, maybe from a speculative perspective, and they've owned them for a long time. They might be willing to sell, but if they're all by themselves, they're going to take longer in order to come to market.
Yeah.
Hey, Cynthia, I have a question. This is Randall.
Hi, Randall.
The inset image on the screen, I'm just curious, you may have touched on it just a minute ago. Of those parcels, does the city own? I'm assuming the city owns some of those, right?
There's definitely city-owned parcels in here, and for sure I will break those out. If it's coded as a government parcel, which a lot of them are, and another thing, there are classifications in the data that the PVA tracks is it's whether it's an exempt status, it's a franchise, whether it's a farm, those kinds of factors. A lot of the government properties are coded as exempt. And so most of those would not be included in here, but it's not to say that there aren't parcels that the city and the local government owns that would be available for development in scenarios 2 and 3.
It's pretty easy to see why, there's a intersection of the areas of town that are experiencing gentrification and the abundance of these smaller lots. So I don't think it's a coincidence. Probably years of disinvestment by the city that allowed those properties to become vacant.
Okay, I'll move
Going
on.
back to Lynn Phillips' earlier question, could Jim maybe speak a little bit to the development potential of these smallest lots, these 2,000 to 5,000 square foot lots?
David, I think the development potential has gone up significantly over the past few months since the Urban County Council increased the floor area ratio. So that was one element that was perhaps holding back development of some of these small substandard lots. And so by changing those rules and allowing more development on them in a different way, it makes them more attractive for investors or even a property owner to do something with that. And we're starting to see a little interest in that. So we're hoping that over the next several months and couple of years that more developers will see that there is now better opportunity from a regulatory standpoint to develop these lots, and that they will become more attractive as redevelopment sites.
And they are located within the desirable parts of the city too. So, location is everything. And when the regulations are relaxed and or, made easier from a development perspective, all of a sudden, you'll see you'll see these parcels almost mushroom, if you will, in desirability as time goes by.
So even these 2,000 and 3,000 square foot vacant lots, some of these shotgun type lots are buildable.
Yeah.
Yes, they're all buildable. Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Is there any way that we can get a guesstimate on the government-owned pieces of property in there?
Oh, I have that. I have that information already. Yes, I
Okay,
can
right.
definitely. I can certainly, while Joe's giving his presentation, I can get that number.
Okay, super.
The other thing to consider is that some of it might not be owned by the government, but it might be owned by like various housing corporations, affordable, like civic groups that
Right.
are in the
For
business
sure.
of building that housing.
Right.
Yes.
Same thing.
Same thing, for sure. The nice thing is, and one thing that I didn't mention is that, and I've shown Craig and some others, is that the data, of course, it's all existing in this GIS platform, but I've made a spreadsheet that has multiple tabs that has broken down the parcels into developed and vacant and in transition and other, and it's all filterable. So all you have to do is sift and sort really fast, and it just tells you the number of what you're looking for. And certainly we will be using that and providing that to anybody who wants to take a look at it, so you can do your own query, because it's built in order to provide transparency and access.
That's amazing.
Excellent.
What we need.
Yes. So moving on, I just wanted to kind of just show you really quickly, just to highlight where some of these other parcels are. Again, some of these parcels, well, some of them definitely include those that are coded as government, those that would be available for development because they are owned by a governmental entity, whether they be a housing consortium or something. But this is where these parcels live in our analysis at this point. We've talked about there's some the golf courses are in here. There are other types of uses that we will be looking at as potential sources for land that can be redeveloped as an alternative use. But at the moment, we've coded it as other, and we'll be looking at that more carefully.
Including bodies of water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I
and
saw
here you
those
go.
too.
Here's how it breaks down.
I saw those too.
This is how it breaks down. So everything that's in that map on the previous slide falls within one of these uses on this table, and how many of those do provide a potential option. You can see 700. Code 700 is by far the largest in terms of total acreage and number of parcels. And like you said, if you're looking at areas that are potentially wet at the moment and may not be wet in the future due to infrastructure, that's where there's a bucket of opportunity there. The telecom parcels 468 and uses 469, those are all itty bitty teeny tiny parcels. They're completely off the table. Surface parking, some of them, most of them will remain surface parking, but we will be looking at them too based on the adjacency of available vacant parcels next to them and their size. And then of course there's 16 government parcels of 60 acres total. So this is where those parcels, like I said, those parcels reside within this other classification and could present opportunities for future development. So we've taken a very first cut. It's extremely conservative. My very first cut at what an underutilized parcel would be considered. I think it's important for everybody to understand there are sort of industry standards on considering what the definition might be. There are other aspects to building this database from where we're starting at today. But my first cut is to take a look at parcels that are over a half an acre in size. Those that have a land value that's twice as the number of the improvement values. Certainly any of those properties that are in that transition category, they are not in the underutilized because they fall into a different bucket. Those that are constructed prior to 2000, so they're 20 years and older, that's a little bit of a, I mean, we could go back 30 years, we could go back 10 years, but 20 years, if we think about it, 5 years from now, they're going to be in that 25-year category. I definitely didn't code those that are in the government use yet as underutilized because they're currently in use and something would have to change in order for them to be available for development, which we've already talked about. And I definitely didn't include any of those that are in the franchise, exempt, or farm classifications, because they are either in other categories or something has to change in order for them to become available too. And then the parcel can't be located within an economic development zone. So with that, a preliminary cut, very conservative. I've mapped that. We will be certainly adding to this once we get into available infrastructure, once we start looking at other information that we've gotten from a wide variety of sources. We will be building this available underutilized property inventory up, not taking it away, but this gives you an idea. First cut, we have a total of 837 acres on 124 potentially underutilized sites. This is one of those topics that, you know, we desperately want your input on. You know, there's a wide variety of talent and knowledge and experience on the phone. If you have, you know, any heartburn about anything, or if I've missed anything, by all means, please let me know. But this is a very preliminary rough cut as to, you know, what is just immediately available for consideration moving forward with a classification of underutilized that adds a bucket of opportunity for future development as we build out scenarios, you know, 1, 2, and 3. Any comments on that?
Excuse me.
Please.
I've heard developer friends say that, for instance, something like Fayette Mall is considered development potential. I mean, we're talking long term.
Yes.
And so I'm looking at, you know, I see areas like that are not
That's right.
in the mix. But if we look at Turfland Mall and Lexington Mall, they're all gone. You know, they've really changed and transformed, and there's still acreage available. So,
right,
you know, they come to mind right away.
No, we intend to definitely put those into the mix. We just wanted to use a set of traditional standards to come up with a first rough cut. So there's no question for sure, Mr. White, that we will be looking at those unique locations like Fayette Mall and assigning a certain percentage of the overall site, maybe 100%, maybe 50% into the bucket for sure. They will come in.
That's a good point, just to make that, as far as this would, I think this cut, well, again, can still be updated for scenario 1. We want to have different distinctions of underutilized redevelopment opportunities by each scenario, so that in scenario 3 we see it, that, you know, a more, that is the most creative, the most for lack of a better term, aggressive attempt to reutilize available land. We would see the most. And so what we're showing here today, so, you know, we're trying to cross the bridge of vacant land here, and we're starting the process of, you know, really like doing that first sift and cut to look at some of the underutilized parcels. But we want to try to create some, you know, distinctions that will separate scenario 1, 2, and 3 parcels that's on the you know, by the definition of underutilized, and that's where you know, your input about what some of those distinctions or criteria should be would be helpful for us.
Mark, can I make a comment on that?
Sure.
Frank Penn. I don't understand why you exclude the parcels that are in the economic development zone. I don't understand the need for that.
Cynthia, or do you want me to handle that?
Well, I was just going to say, only because they are included as far as development potential going forward. So we already know that those parcels that are in the economic development zone will be developed, and they're, you know, they might be developed today and they might be underutilized, but we know that there's a plan for those areas. And so if you all feel very strongly that they should be in there, we can include it, but we're already addressing the economic development zone as well as the expansion areas in a different way. This this allows us to provide opportunities for us to understand together where there's opportunity that doesn't fall into a different bucket.
Yeah,
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand. I'm not being critical here at all.
I
I'm just
know.
trying to understand the process.
Yes, I know. Yes,
Thank you.
Cynthia,
you're welcome.
an attendee has asked a question that's in the Q&A
Oh.
portion, if you could respond to, related to acreage discrepancy between page 7 and page 8.
Cynthia, do you see the question?
I do. Page 7 shows 1025 acres available. Page 8 shows 149. What's the difference in the numbers? It could be that yesterday we were manipulating some new transition properties. And so it could just be a number that I didn't update on that particular slide, but I'll definitely clarify that and get back to you.
I gather 1494 is the number being used right now.
Yes, I do too. It's just that if I get out of this and go to my spreadsheet, I'll lose you. So I can clarify that even before we get off the phone today. I just need to look at something that's not in this PowerPoint. So I apologize.
And then Cynthia, can you also look at the chat screen, and there's a comment there related to how the ratio of land to improvement value was determined?
Oh, so yes, the data that we get from the PVA includes a land value and an improvement value, and they obviously assess that every year. And so when I look at the two columns, I write just a simple mathematical equation in order to calculate out if in fact the land value is twice as high as the improvement value, but it's all based on data that comes from the PVA. I didn't make up the values.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Luckily, and that's the beauty, is that by getting all the data from David in various tables, we were able to append that to the geography. And so we were able to look at, the zoning and the land use and all of the valuable data that the PVA tracks and pull it all together into one geodatabase. So with that.
Yeah. Well, there's a second question about Red Mile, which I think I'll address, Cynthia. Red
Okay.
Mile is the harness track. The question is, like, would the entire property or just the out parcel property that's not the track be considered in the first scenario? That's a good point. I think we'd have to, at this point, it is a going concern, and it could very easily have a prosperous future if the law requires the track to maintain the casino. So I think that is something that we would might parse the difference between the outlying parcels and the actual track facility itself. But certainly there's another scenario in which the entire parcel could be redeveloped.
Yes, that's the sort of the next step, is to really fine tuning, finding other opportunities and clarifying those that we've identified in this first cut.
So just to touch on, I believe it was Mr. Robinson's question. So there will be a point where somebody applies some floor area ratio analysis to some of these other parcels like the mall. It's in this other B6P, and it may end up on the list once we apply some floor area ratio analysis.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, what we ultimately will get to is how many acres and how many square feet of uses will we have within each of our three scenarios.
A wonderful presentation, Cynthia. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else related to this presentation, we'll move on to Joe Herman, what's related to sewer capacity insurance program and capacity.
Hey, Greg, I have one other question.
Please.
Christine, what about the Lexmark property? Is that in consideration at all? Maybe that'd be a question for David.
I was assuming it would be part of the floor area ratio, and I was thinking about that one along with some of the B6P as definitely being underutilized from a floor area ratio standpoint.
Right.
Yeah, we are, I mean, in looking at it, I even calculated out in the table the percentage of building, area to the parcel size, and that was one of the factors I used. But in looking at, I mean, Lexmark is one, certainly Fayette Mall is one. These larger, properties, that are underutilized, they will definitely be put into the bucket with an assumption of how much redevelopment opportunity can we anticipate to go on each of these individual parcels as part of the overall analysis going forward. But what we wanted to do is just kind of establish a baseline of what do we have that's out there that is in fact, old, or its value is certainly one that would entice a developer to want to buy it because the land is so valuable compared to the building. All of these factors are what drive new development. When you look at something like Lexmark today, the building improvements are significant, and so the cost for acquisition is high. So that's a really heavy lift for a developer to come in. And it's not to say that Lexmark won't decide in the future to do something completely different or sell it off or sell off a piece, but it's almost as if it's not the low-hanging fruit from a development perspective in order to identify what your underutilized potential is. This is just basically that underlying fruit bucket, and now we'll start putting in other properties that are less of a piece of low-hanging fruit that will require larger investment, but obviously give you greater returns because of their location and their size and their development potential.
Right.
Cynthia,
Thank you.
let me ask you, Cynthia, a question about that. Cynthia, you're talking about Lexmark not being low-hanging fruit. We're already developing it. Amazon's coming in with a big operation.
I know that they sold off a piece. What I'm talking about is not that piece that Amazon's building. They might come in, somebody might come in and buy the park to the south. I'm talking about the parcel that's the larger parcel where there's significant investment on that particular piece of property, where there's a building that has a significant value to it. And in order to sell it or in somebody to buy it, they look at the entire value. And that's what I'm saying. It's not low-hanging fruit because it's got a huge value to it that's taxable today. An underutilized portion of the Lexmark property, that's simpler because they're just buying the raw land. They're buying something that was a park before. They're not buying a building that has a value of $17 million just for the building. And I'm just making that number up.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but what bothers me the most about that is that Lexmark has been for development for several years, and we have done parcels, and we've rezoned them, we've redone them. They've been purchased, big significant investments being made on for the Amazon. So I don't think price, availability of land and location outweighs price.
That is true.
And I just want to make that comment because we're making an assumption that they're too high for somebody to buy, and I think that's a tough assumption to make.
Well, I think I guess I would say I agree with you completely, and certainly Lexmark might be a unique situation in Lexington that it deserves to be in the first bucket because of the things that you've just mentioned, that it's a targeted area, you've got a willing seller, regardless of the building value, it's people are desirous of building there. I think, though, that is a unique situation for the most part when you are trying to identify what is underutilized. If you think that Lexmark is an acreage that should be in the first bucket, this initial cut, we're happy to put it there because of these unique circumstances, but you can't necessarily say that about all of the underutilized property that's in Lexington. There's other factors that we need to consider in order to truly appreciate the contribution it can make to the overall city's redevelopment opportunities. And you're always going to have outliers or these unique circumstances, and I'm certainly happy to put it in there if that's what everybody wants. But this is just our first blush. We definitely intended to put Lexmark in. We definitely intend to put Fayette Mall in, and there's lots of other larger properties that are underutilized.
That's fine.
In a different way.
That's fine.
Christine,
Thank you. I
Christine,
understand.
could we separate the acreage out of the acreage that has improvements on it, or do you want to just keep it all together?
Well, I think it would be a lot of work to separate it out.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be a lot of work to separate it out, but we'll do our best in order to understand, you know, what is underutilized because of that building floor area ratio and other attributes, and certainly because there's plenty of areas in the city that you all know about, and certainly the team knows about, the city and the team going forward know that they present opportunities for the city to meet unmet demand going forward for a lot of different reasons.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
May I
Okay,
ask
I'm gonna,
a summary question? Cynthia, we've talked about the next step and including some of these things. How many cuts of this do you foresee, or is there going to be 2 or 3 more steps as we start to get to a final project, or how many more steps are there, I guess?
I would guess that there's probably 2 or 3 more steps.
Okay.
You know, for purposes of putting, you know, like piecing it back out, which is what we've done, and now putting it all back together and coding it. But, you know, we'll do them sequentially and, you know, come up with a number, because the important thing is to define them by scenarios. So in order to putting them into the scenario buckets is one step, putting everything in that's, you know, underutilized is another step. So yeah, I'm sure it's 2 or 3.
This is Mark, just to kind of clarify that, or it's in my mind, how I clarify that is, yeah, today we want to suggest that vacant land is vacant land in all scenarios, and that it's,
Right.
and so and the real distinction in vacant land is how far along in the pipeline is it before it's no longer vacant, right? And then when we get into the underutilized, that's where like the scenarios really kind of have a more, you know, specific role or relevance in that what is underutilized in this baseline scenario is a relatively conservative definition, and then we keep making these cuts. The conversation today, you know, in particular, the example of Lexmark is a good one for us. Why we wanted to start that conversation now, because we do expect that there'd be a few examples that we say, hey, put this in this bucket, or hey, change this criteria to this. And then as we move forward with these different distinctions in underutilized land, you know, we can talk about, you know, where we want to draw the line between each scenario.
Chairs, before we move on, I did want to mention, I know that there's probably a few more questions that everyone has, and I know there's going to be questions as you have a chance to revisit the slides as well. Please feel free to send those questions to me, and I'll make sure that they get passed along to the project team. I'd like to try to put those all in one place if possible, so we have kind of a tracking of the questions that we're receiving and the responses that go back. So if you wouldn't mind, as other questions come up, again, please feel free to just forward those directly to me by email, or give me a call if you prefer to proceed that way. Thank you.
Hey, Craig,
Yes.
are you capturing these questions in both the Q&A section and on the participant questions?
It should be recording them. I think we've been answering most of them as we've gone along, but the recording should also be capturing the Q&A as well. Great question.
Thanks.
We get the clarification on Amy Clark's Q&A question.
Which was that?
It's getting back to that minimum square footage, 2,500 versus 6,000. Amy is specifically asking about R3, but it was kind of the same thing that I did a poor job of asking earlier.
there's no poor jobs in questions.
That question, if you'd like to hear it, is it states that the R3 minimum lot size for one family subdivided lots is at not 2,500 square feet, not 6,000. I would need to take a look at that. I don't know if anybody from planning has the answer off the top of their head.
Let me give you a quick answer. As I said when I addressed this question to Dr. Phillips earlier, I was giving the high level view. New subdivision of land in the R3 is 6,000 square feet. There are special provisions in the R3 depending on existing lot size and other circumstances, or the lot frontage and existing and other circumstances, the lot size is much smaller. So yes, it's a much more generous development, but looking at the sort of the conservative and the maximum for R3, it is 6,000 square feet.
Thank you, Jim. If we could, we'll move on to the sewer capacity issue. And I was very hopeful that picture on the cover of this was not Lexington, but I see the Lexington stamp on the manhole cover. So
Yes,
I'm afraid there's no denying that is Lexington. Joe, you want to take it away, sir?
Sure. If it's any consolation, that was it's an older photograph.
Okay.
We're on the north end of town.
2006, 2007.
Greg, we have those big tanks now.
That would have been this photo's probably about 2008, 2009 when we were doing the sewer assessment. So Mark had asked me to kind of come in and talk a little bit about the wastewater capacity assurance program that Lexington has. And I'll be honest, I'm not up to speed on the Sustainable Growth Initiative. So he told me, go ahead and present it, gave me a little bit, and then he's going to come in at the end and kind of show you how it's relevant to your all's initiative. So so bear with me here. So I'm going to keep it high level because I could spend hours talking about this.
He does.
So we'll hit a little bit of an overview in history just so you can put it in context, and then we'll dive right into what is the cap and kind of how it works. And then we'll talk about CTIMS, which is a public-facing web portal that you can use to actually see what sewer capacity looks like in Lexington today. And then we'll follow up with any questions. So when Lexington got their consent decree, it gave rise to many programs, but the two that are relevant today are the Remedial Measures Program and the Capacity Assurance Program. And they're somewhat intertwined, so I'll spend a little bit of time on the Remedial Measures Program. What that says is, hey, the EPA said, Lexington, you're going to spend $600 million to do a capital improvement program to improve your sewer system so that way you can restore adequate capacity and get rid of these overflows and bypasses. And that's well underway, and they're hoping to have those improvements done by 2026. The other program, this one we'll focus on, is the Capacity Assurance Program. And what that did was it put restrictions on who could connect to this, what future connections could tap onto the sewer system. It said, hey, you've got these overflows and bypasses. It doesn't seem like very responsible to allow you to have new people keep getting added when you're already at maximum capacity. The other thing it said is you're going to maintain a hydraulic computer model of the system, and you're going to go ahead and use that to evaluate where you do have capacity and where you don't, as well as go ahead and use that to size how big those remedial measures plan improvements need to be. So this is kind of a quick timeline. And so what you see there is the consent decree was lodged in 2008. And then 3 years later, it's signed by the judge and everything's ink on Mylar, so to speak. And that set in a lot of things in motion, both the CAP and the RMP. RMP is what we call the Remedial Measures Plan, and CAP is a Capacity Assurance Program. And so took us a little time, but then by June 2013 is when the enabling ordinance that went in, and it's here in the lower left if you're so inclined to read it, that said Lexington now has a capacity assurance program. And then that SCAP is the name of the document or the plan that was submitted to EPA for approval. And so while they were reviewing that and getting approval, Lexington said, let's go ahead and get this program started now. Even though we're not on the clock with the EPA to have it started, let's get it started now so that way we can work out any hiccups or kinks before we're kind of under the scrutiny. And being a substantive change to the way land development was happening, they wanted to kind of get that ironed out. And so it went live on a voluntary basis on July 3rd of 2013, and then the EPA approved the plan, and we went official with respect to the federal government on 2014. In that same time, these orange stars are kind of when the remedial measures plan, and they kind of carved up Lexington into 3 different areas. And then so they staggered their plans 6 months apart from one another, and they're figuring out which projects need to be built in order to get rid of all these overflows and restore adequate capacity in the system. So if anybody ever asks you what does $600 million look like, that's what that looks like. These are all the projects that are in the remedial measures plan. You don't really care about the details so much, just recognize it's a lot of bigger pipes, bigger pump stations, and it's some of these wet weather storage tanks I heard somebody mention earlier on the call. So that way, I don't know if you can tell at this scale, but those red stars on there are all the overflows. So when they do all those projects, all those red overflows go away. So let's jump into what the cap is now that you kind of got a little bit of an understanding of the programs and kind of how they were birthed. So what is the cap? And it's very simplistic form. It's just a mechanism which says, before we're going to let anybody tap onto the sewer system, we're going to make sure it doesn't negatively impact the sewer system. We're not going to make things worse. So in order to allow a new tap connection for, say, a Masterson Station subdivision or Amazon's fulfillment center or whatever, Lexington has to certify with this new hydraulic model that the new flow will not contribute to an overflow or bypass. And then also, not only can you not overflow into people's basements or into the manholes or into the creek or anything, they don't want to see excessive surcharging. And I'll give you a graphic here in a second on what that means. In other words, it says, hey, you got to be able to certify adequate capacity in your entire sewer system, which is it gives me a little bit of a chuckle, because if you could do that, then you wouldn't have gotten the consent decree in the first place. So let me jump to the surcharge criteria. Not only can't have overflows, it says we don't want the water level in the sewer system, and this is the wastewater sewer system, to be more than 2 feet above the pipe crown. If it's over that, it's considered excessive surcharge, and you don't have capacity, and you cannot allow anybody connect, or you can't have the water level within 3 feet of the rim, or whichever one dictates. So it's because they said if you're already getting out of the pipe and into the manhole, we're kind of on the warning track, or we want a little bit of factor of safety, because everybody knows these hydrologic and hydraulic calculations aren't exact. They're not down to the millimeter type thing. So they want a little bit of factor of safety. So what does that adequate capacity really mean? There's a 20,000 foot map of Lexington, and the pastel colors reflect each of the sewer basins. So everything in one color, all hydraulically drains to the same spot. It's very similar to like a watershed drainage area, except this is obviously piped with sanitary sewers. And so Lexington's got 2 treatment plants where, X marks the spot there. And what, as you probably are well aware, Lexington sits on a hill. So what happens is all those areas, these pastel areas, they drain towards the perimeter of the urban service boundary. So as a result, you have all these big major pump stations in these sewer basins, and then they in turn have to pump to one of those 2 treatment plants, and that's kind of where they go there. So what the EPA is saying by you have to certify adequate capacity, and we'll just pick on, say, Wolf Run here. So if you're having a burger at McDonald's over here on Nicholasville Road and you flush the toilet, it's got to get all the way through the pipes, all the way safely to the Wolf Run pump station, has to be able to be pumped to Town Branch and treated without discharging into waters of the U.S., meaning it has to safely make its journey. And so what they're telling you is, and this is what's in the consent decree, and this is the basis of the capacity assurance program, is you have to certify that your entire gravity system has adequate capacity. Those are your pipes, your transmission system, your pumps and force mains, as well as the 2 treatment plants, the West Hickman and Town Branch. And so that's what they're telling you. So the $1 million question is, okay, where can we certify adequate capacity in Lexington? Currently, nowhere. There's nowhere in Lexington right now that we can certify adequate capacity. And the reason being, in a lot of areas, the pipes are big enough. The remedial measures plans have already started upsizing some areas, and some areas were already big enough. And the pump stations, by and large, most of those are in good shape. It's your 2 treatment plants. They don't have enough storage capacity yet. That's why they're building those tanks. They built the first phase of both those tanks at both treatment plants, but the second phase is coming in. So right now, we can't certify any adequate capacity anywhere. So you're starting to ask yourself, well, if this plan went in 2013 and we can't certify adequate capacity, how come we haven't heard about this moratorium on new development for the last 7 years? Well, and the reason being is the EPA recognizes that, says, hey, Rome wasn't built in a day. So they've allowed something called a bank credits program. It says, hey, we'll go ahead and let you do this interim measure until 2026 when you build all your R&P projects and restore adequate capacity. We'll give you essentially a grace period here that you can still allow new connections to go on, so it's not a moratorium. And the way that bank credit program works, this is, hey, if you can't certify adequate capacity, you use this bank credit system. And you earn capacity credits by removing extraneous flow from your sewer system. Remember, the sanitary sewer system is only meant to take sewage flows. It's not meant to take stormwater. But yet a lot of the stormwater, when it rains, it's finding its way into the pipe through leaks and when improper connections and stuff like that. So what they've said is if you can go ahead and remove some of those, and you're making room for maybe a new development or new tap connection to go on. So they said for you earn these capacity credits by doing improvements, we'll let you offset those with new flow from development. And it's not a one-to-one. So it actually, new development actually helps out more than pays its share from that perspective. And then like when you build storage, if you build a 20 million gallon storage tank to take some of that sewage, now you got 20 million gallons you can add to for new connections. And so the way it kind of works is we've divided the sewer system into banks because we don't want, the whole goal is not to make any of these overflows worse. We couldn't say, hey, you can go ahead and fix a bunch of leaks, say on the south side of town, and then really put a lot of new connections on the north side because they're not even hydraulically connected. So what you would do is make the south side better and the north side worse. So they didn't want to do that. So all these transactions have to occur upstream of the bottleneck. So in order to do that, we had to carve out every one of those bottlenecks. So we carved out the geography upstream of each one of these overflows and excessive surcharge areas. And then we manage each one of those bank accounts. And it's very easy to think of this like a checkbook and say, okay, everything upstream of this bank, that's where you have to monitor your transactions. And capital improvements are considered deposits, new sewer connections are withdrawals kind of thing. And that way you don't make that bottleneck or that overflow any worse. And that's why the EPA allowed it, because you weren't making it any worse. You weren't restoring adequate capacity, but you were kind of treading water until the RMP improvements could go in and improve the sewer system and restore adequate capacity. So this is a very oversimplification of the process. So how does it work? How do you request sewer capacity? So an applicant will go ahead and submit a sewer capacity request form. They submit that to the tap desk over there at Division of Water Quality's office on Lyle Industrial. It gets logged into this tracking software I'll introduce here shortly. Technical review is performed. Hey, do we have enough capacity credits? If so, we'll go ahead and update the bank balance, and they'll issue a determination letter saying, hey, we've done our review, and in accordance with the EPA's approved plan, there is capacity for you. And then what happens is if you want it, you have to pay 25% of your tap fee up front. So it's not a new fee. You're just paying your tap fee, a portion of it up front in advance to kind of lock it in. And the reason that was designed into the process was you didn't want a bunch of people putting in frivolous capacity requests with no skin in the game. Because otherwise what would happen is if, let's say, your backyard backs up to a nice farm and you never want to see it developed, you'll just, hey, I need 1 billion gallons of capacity. You'll suck the banks dry, and then you'll always have your view in the backyard, and it's almost equivalent to a taking. So they wanted to have some mechanism in there where serious developments would move forward, but people trying to game the system could not. And so once you pay your tap fee, then you get the approval letter, and that's what we affectionately refer to as your golden ticket, and that allows you to move forward in the land development process. So this is the capacity tracking software, and these are some static screenshots. So don't get alarmed at the bank balances or anything like that. We'll show you the ones that are the most current, but this was kind of easy to walk through it. So if you look up here at the top, ctims.lexington.gov, you could go there right now if you were not on your computer, and you can see the same thing I'm looking at. That's where you can see where capacity is in Lexington. It's a public-facing website, so anybody and their brother can go to it. And so what you're seeing here is I've zoomed in kind of the downtown area, and you see these black lines here. Those are your bank boundaries. So let's just pick on this one right here. This is Chevy Chase, where Tate's Creek meets Euclid, and then going down Euclid. So everything in here is all hydraulically connected upstream of a bottleneck down here. So if I want to build anything in this area, I've got to make sure that I've earned enough capacity. Improvements occurring inside that fence or that boundary will use offset other ones in there. And then we've color coded them. You can click on them and you can see the balance. I've clicked on one here. The bank name is kind of a code. It's really just the manhole where the overflow is occurring. So we've named them after that for easiness. But you can see, hey, I've got over 608,000 gallons per day available of credits that have been earned that I can use to offset new development. And for context, in the capacity assurance program, about one single family home is about 200 gallons per day. So if you've got 608,000, you can build a lot of homes if you want. But if you had the real estate, so the green banks is kind of a quick way. Green banks mean we have a ton of capacity. There's been a lot of credits banked. The yellow banks means not as much. We're getting close to empty. And red means there's nothing there. Either we have zero or there's somebody on the waiting list. And a lot of the red areas are kind of irrelevant because they're areas that aren't already fully built out anyway. And it's very easy. You can come over here and search for an address. And if you search for an address, like if you type in 313 Blueberry Road, it'll dial in much closer. You can see aerial and you can kind of see if you're interested in specific parcels. You click on it and this is the bank you're in, and this one has a little less capacity. You can turn on expansion areas and all these other things. And I'll go back one side. The blue areas I didn't explain. The blue areas are areas that people have requested capacity and it's been granted or it's in process and they just haven't tapped out yet. So if let's say you put a capacity request and you want to make sure it got bagged and tagged or logged in, it's there. You can see that it's there. And you can click on it and get some high level details. I mean, you're not going to get anybody's phone number, ATM PIN number, but you can at least get what the name of the development is. Oh, it's Shady Acres subdivision or something like that. It's enough to know if you need to ask more questions with planning. And then if you up here, you have 3 buttons. Home is where we've been. If you go to the ledger, you can click on any bank, and it's just like a checkbook ledger. So you can see here Lexington made a bunch of improvements here on 8/18 of 2015. They replaced a lateral. It goes to this bank. It earned this many credits, and here's the running total of the balance. Down here on 10/12, there was a permanent allocation request. That's somebody requesting capacity, and they made a deposit, or they withdrew 237 or 231.7 gallons per day for whatever they happen to be building. If you click on the details button over here, you can see what was being built. So it's really easy for the development community or anybody to see where we have capacity, where we don't have capacity. And so that is kind of the crash course on your capacity assurance program. The next couple screenshots are ones that we took them literally from the website last night. So they're the most current. And I'll kind of hand it back over to you, Mark, to kind of talk how this tool and how the capacity assurance program plays into your sustainable growth initiative.
Thanks, Joe. So,
Mark, may I ask a question?
Sure.
I don't know if this is the right time, but Joe, you said for a 3-bedroom single family house that the demand is about 200 gallons per day. Would that also, do the numbers vary if it's multifamily? Are we still looking at a 3-bedroom at 200 gallons per day? And how is commercial accommodated?
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask me the question that I always get from and what it is if you're looking at LFUCG's design manuals, it'll say something like 300, 400 gallons per day per single family home. And we're only using 200. And the reason we're doing that is when we were trying to figure out what that was, we went out and flow monitored some of the new neighborhoods and figured out, did house counts, people counts, and backed into that to figure out what the actual strain on the sewer system is. But the capacity assurance program, again, it's a stopgap measure until adequate capacity can be restored by the remedial measures plan. And so they wanted to be responsible where they're not going to make SSOs worse, but they also didn't want you to have to run the hydraulic model every 5 minutes or gather a bunch of information. So it's kind of a little bit of a simplification. So it's a single family home. Doesn't matter if it's 1 bedroom or 15 bedrooms.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't take into account if the kids go away for college and now you have less people living in the house. It doesn't get down to that granular level of detail. But to answer your question, there's a flow rate table for different types of land use and building. So for example, single family home is 198 gallons or 192 gallons per day. A duplex is twice that. Apartments is based on the number of units. Doctor's offices are one, car washes are another, and sometimes they're based on square footage. Sometimes they're based on laundromats, number of washing machines, that kind of thing. It's all based on kind of sewage flow rates. And so if, I'll give you a link, or at least I'll talk about some of the other documents. There's a table that lists them all out if you're curious about individual uses. It's also on that sewer capacity request form as well. There's a worksheet there that has them all there too. But it varies based on the land use. So when the developer is asking for capacity, he's got to tell us, or she's got to tell us what they're building.
Okay. Sounds like a parking code. Similar ways to assign parking. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Sure.
Well, thank you again, Joe. So basically, the way we're relating this to our study is that, we also have to consider how our development patterns in each scenario would affect various infrastructure differently. And what I really found helpful about the CTEMs is that we have a simple tool that's going to be around to use to really see where in the city adequate capacity, given understanding the whole consent decree affects the treatment plants, but individually within these sewer sheds where we have adequate capacity to do stuff in the near term versus long term. So in this map, like you can see, this is a screenshot, so I can't click on it, but on the north side of town, the capacity is very close to zero. And if we were to try to suggest in a scenario 3 that we wanted to do a major infill development project in that particular area, we would probably have to say that would be a longer term project that would occur after the capacity remedial measures program and made the improvements necessary to create the capacity. And so that's one takeaway from this, is that all of the areas that are have capacity issues, they have, as a part of this this analysis, they have done their own build out study of what they believe the 2035 demand will be. Now it's pretty generalized, but the intent is it's not to provide the adequate capacity for today. It is to try to provide capacity going forward. However, that being said, it looks at what's in the urban service boundary. It's doing this build out capacity where the capacity currently, where we have the expectation that the demand will be, which of course it aligns with our study in this particular case, but it does suggest that they haven't thought about a major redevelopment of Red Mile into like a high intensity use. Similarly, as you can see on this map, the red areas are areas where they're actually in an overflow condition. And as Joe explained to me, this is really the question of the pump stations and their capacity.
Yeah, it's not necessarily an overflow condition because there's overflows all over Lexington. What it's telling you is those are areas that they have not earned enough capacity that they can use to offset any new connections. And one of it is this area down here is the Armstrong Mill pump station out Armstrong Mill, getting close to DeLong Road. There's plans to move that pump station into the expansion area 1. When that ultimately happens is probably several years away, but there's really nobody can tap on in there. In fact, that's the only person on the wait list is they're at Squires and Armstrong Mill. There's a parcel there that wants to develop it, but there's not sewer capacity. The other one's up here. This is the Greenbrier area. It's already fully developed, but there's no capacity there. But nobody's talking about building.
Yeah, I guess, Joe, if you can go ahead and advance the slide.
Sure.
So like, again, that's the expansion areas. And then the next, click one more time. And we're seeing that that's where all of the current reservations are made, and they make sense where they're made. Like this is another use of this tool, as we can see where the developers are making plans and like putting skin in the game, as Joe put it. And you can also see that our sewer extends into Jessamine County, and you can see the Brandon Crossing area where the reservations are being made down there. And again, the capacity, the overall capacity will be resolved with the storage tanks. But some of these cases, as Joe was, in particular, advance the slide one more time. When we talk about like the Overbrook Farm area, they can't necessarily expect to drain into the current pump stations. They would need to. They have Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but they have the virtue of gravity on their side along Hickman Creek, but they would have to build that infrastructure in order, in that case, they would be fine. If they stayed in that green area to flow towards the treatment plant, they would be fine, but they can't just tap into the closest connections that are currently there, because those are spec'd to serve the development that is already in place, which for the most part for that area is built out.
Right.
It was not intended, and that the capacity plan is not intended to increase capacity at those pump stations. New infrastructure for sewer would have to be developed to deal with any new development.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction. Like you said, we have a existing conditions model and a future conditions model. And the future conditions assumes everything that's vacant, that's not, park or cemetery, will develop. And there's a certain how it will develop. There's an assumption for that 9 people per acre type thing. And so a land use density. What it doesn't account for is it's everything what the urban service boundary is today. So if that's what they're restoring adequate capacity for. If everything develops inside the current urban service boundary. So if things were to change with that boundary, that you'd have to take a second look to see if you have sewer capacity. And this Overbrook Farm becomes a good example of that. That was assumed, since everything drains this way, gravity towards the creek here, it was assumed it would drain gravity here and then pump right over to the treatment plant here. If for some reason they only want to develop this part and try to pump back into the Heartland neighborhood, those pump stations don't have capacity, nor will they have capacity when the RMP improvements are done, because they're not designed to take that. So when we say adequate capacity to be restored, it's based on how things are anticipated to develop and where they would logically go. If somebody tries to kind of change the way they want it to do, then sewer capacity really needs to be looked at again, because again, they had to size them for certain conditions, and you had to kind of crystal ball what those conditions are. And so that's one thing to take into account, because the last thing you want to do is allow an area to develop and then throw all that new flow into a system that just wasn't designed to take it.
And so, oh, go ahead.
Mark, can I ask Joe a question?
Absolutely.
Joe, when you all did your capacity assurance program, theoretically, you programmed it to where that you could take enough with the tanks that you could develop what's inside the urban service boundary at this time. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, and also there's an MOU with Jessamine County. I don't remember the number. It might be 2 million gallons or something like that, but it also included that the Lexington would honor its commitment to allow up to a certain amount of flow that naturally drains from Jessamine County into Fayette County. But yes.
So if the Urban County Council decided sometime that they needed to expand the treatment plant, would they have the option to expand West Hickman, or would they have to expand Town Branch?
I mean, West Hickman's in Jessamine County. I don't know. They've got a fairly large parcel there. They could expand it, and they just did recently. They've already built one 22 million gallon tank, and they're going to build another one that's a little bit smaller than that. And they upgraded their headwork. So they could expand the plants if they wanted to. Again, once the second tanks go in a couple of years, they'll be able to certify adequate capacity at the treatment plants, and a lot of these areas will open up. The issue becomes right now is some areas that you can't get it safely to the.
I understand.
Okay.
And the council made the decision to go back to Jacobson Park rather than to extend that on through toward West Hickman. So that's all council decisions. But before we could do a major expansion, we'd have to solve this sewer problem at some point, right?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why the EPA wanted, not to get too far in the weeds, but every utility in every city up to the point of getting a consent decree does their system, what's called a stress to fail approach. We'll keep adding bricks to the wagon until the wheels fall off, right? And so what the EPA said was, we want you to build a model so that way you can play these what if scenarios. What happens if we opened up that area between, say, Hayes Boulevard and Blue Sky, and open that up for expansion area 15 or whatever? And what would that do to the sewer system? You can go ahead and evaluate those things. So that way, if you decide to grow, and that's a decision for somebody else, you're doing it in a responsible manner.
I understand.
All right.
Thank you, Joe. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Sure. I think I wanted to thank Joe for bringing up the model, because that's also in our toolbox as well. Is we can, if we wanted to do, so as for example, in this Overbrook scenario, it has capacity if it does if it flows in the correct direction, as opposed to going due west, right? But what about, it's also the capacity is also established for the amount of residential development that it's currently would be planned for by their more low density standards. But what if in scenario 3 it's a much more high intensity development, or maybe we put a more high intensity development in the north side of Lexington? We can have the model. We can have a model run to kind of explain to us how does that affect the capacity of the system, understanding that by 2026 the overall treatment capacity will be there, but there will still be situations where we may be implying greater density or greater intensity to some place that we want to make sure that that the sewer system can meet it, and if not, what would be the cost to accommodate that level of development?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Anyway, that was me tying it all back up. I know we're running really late or over time, so I'm going to stop there. Obviously, anybody has any more questions, but
hey, Mark, this
sure.
is Ann. There was a question that was sent in by Amy Clark. Can I ask that real quick?
Of course.
As a developer, can I bring capacity can I buy capacity by donating improvements to my sewer shed? How does this work? Does the credit come to me alone or to anyone seeking capacity in this sewer shed?
Okay, so the way it works is it's kind of like standing in line, first come, first serve. So the city, as they do improvements, and they're spending in their collection system about $5 million a year to earn capacity to fill these banks up. Let's say you want to develop an area and they don't have enough credits. And so you ask the city, when do you think you'll have enough credits and you can give me the green light or the golden ticket? And they say, well, we're probably a year away. And you're like, I don't want to wait a year. There is something called a developer earned credit program, where if you want to fund the sewer improvements, those credits will go directly to you since you're funding those. Otherwise, you got to wait in line like everybody else. So there is that program, but to date, the city has been very proactive, where there was always credits available for people. So they're like, well, I'll take the free ones. Why would I pay for them?
Right.
So the city's been very proactive with that. The only exception is that Overbrook Farm area, because those improvements haven't happened yet, and the Armstrong Mill pump station. That's the only area in Greenbrier, but nobody's asking to develop there anyway. The other thing I'll mention too is when I first came on, Cynthia was doing her presentation on kind of a lot of the infill development. When you're doing a virgin field and you're putting in new homes or something, I need the full capacity amount for that home. If I'm tearing down a home and I'm putting a new home in its place, I still have to apply for capacity, but it's a thumbs up because you haven't added any new capacity. So when you tear something down and build something up, you only need to have the excess capacity. You get credit for what was there before. So a lot of the infill development's not going to be as big an issue as people may think.
That's great. Gosh, guys, this has been a fabulous meeting. Joe, Mark, Christine, thank you all so much. I mean, a lot of meat in this meeting, and I feel like we are getting somewhere, and I'm so excited. It's wonderful.
Good. Thank you.
Joe, if you go from a single family infill lot to a duplex or a fourplex or something like that, then obviously you're adding capacity, and there's a different permitting process. Okay.
Yeah, and what we call that, whatever was there before, we call that a use of record. And so let's say you had and I'll make it very simple. Let's say I had a 3-story office building and I tore it down to put in a better office building, but it's only 2 stories. So I'm actually using less capacity than I was before. We don't credit that excess back to the bank for anybody to use. That credit stays with that parcel, because otherwise it'd be considered a taking. So the other thing I'll mention too is, and I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, these improvements, in most cases, it's not a 1-to-1. So for every, say, 2 or 3 gallons I remove from the city removes from the sewer system, I can only use it to offset 1 gallon. So that the reason they did that is they wanted to kind of make up for, say, sins of the past, but really also to make sure that the new development and the existing new development wasn't allowed at the expense of the existing customer. So nobody can claim, oh, I didn't have a sewer problem until the Walmart went in next door type thing. New development actually makes the situation better. They're not going to restore adequate capacity, but they're certainly not making the overflows worse, and they're making it just a fraction better. So that's called their trade ratio, but it's often not a 1-to-1, it's a 2-to-1. For every 2 gallons of clear water you get off, you can add one gallon of sewage type thing.
Thank you. Two
Sure.
very interesting presentations. Are there any questions or comments from the task force members at this time? Craig, can we see if there's any public comment? And if there is a public comment, we'd like to limit it to 3 minutes per speaker.
Certainly, anyone in the attendees room that would like to speak, please raise your blue hand and you'll be brought into the meeting. All right, we have one so far. Bob Quick has raised his hand. I'm going to bring him into the meeting with your permission, chairs.
Please do,
Sure.
Bob.
Yes.
Commerce Lexington. Hello, Bob.
Mr. Quick, if you'd like to turn on your video and unmute, you're free to speak.
There we go.
Hi.
Hello, Robert. Good to see you. I just, what's that?
Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you. Good to see you all. I just wanted to go back to the Stantec presentation and make a couple comments. My name is Bob Quick, President and CEO of Commerce Lexington. And I want to thank you for the opportunities to make a couple comments, but also thank you for allowing the business group to have a session with Stantec folks the other day to kind of talk through this whole process, but for them to get a lot of feedback from businesses, many of which are being impacted by decisions that you're going to be making. Part of our mission at Commerce Lexington is we have put together a business park, the Bluegrass Business Park, located in Citation Boulevard and Spur Road. And that park consisted of 97 acres and includes well-known global companies like Big Ass Fans, Tiffany & Company, Webasto, Roof Systems. And these companies announced 1,700 jobs from their creation, with an average annual payroll of over $44,000. And they invested more than $175 million in our economy. But as you all know, that park is full. So as demonstrated by the business park, light industrial zoned land for strategic economic development projects, which is essential for our growth to the site selection process, as it's as important as finding that skilled workforce. And ultimately, availability of light industrial land has not kept pace with the population growth of Lexington. So the work presented today by Stantec does solidify what we've been seeing as well, that there are very few reasonable sites of at least 10 acres or more scattered across Lexington. And the 200 acres in the Turkey Nick are still several years out due to relocation of the dairy research facility, and then the cost of the infrastructure implementation. And as Joe pointed out, that'll be impacted by the cap as well. So my point is Lexington needs more shovel-ready light industrial land for the expansion of our existing businesses. And we have businesses right now that are looking outside of Lexington because of the lack of options in Vacant County. And you would have heard those on February 2nd. If you haven't seen that tape, that would be a good thing to listen to. Their departure would not only result in the loss of talent within our community, but also the loss of much needed payroll tax revenue. We have been maintaining a flight risk spreadsheet, and that list of potential job losses keeps growing. And we're working to do everything we can to keep and grow these companies in Lexington, but that job is getting much more difficult, as evidenced by companies such as the Bluegrass Distillers choosing their home in Midway. They're leaping across that county line. Anyway, just wanted to make that point that we continue to see this loss or potential loss in companies for all the very reasons you're talking about, and for why we need some action and hopefully provide us with that strategic land of for the development here of light industrial zone land. Thank you. I don't know if I got that in 3 minutes.
You did. Bob, could I ask, can I request that at some point you share that flight risk spreadsheet with us? And then what, as far as light industrial needs, what lot sizes, what particulars are needed as far as the specifics, as far as lot sizes and so on?
Your first question on providing that list, some of the companies are known, many of those we deal with, they're still interacting with us in a confidential manner. So that's difficult for us to provide that. They'll work with us, but they've got to trust us.
Understood.
Yeah. And your second was what size land? I would let Jenna make a stronger comment on that, but it varies, but especially in a larger number of acres than in fewer.
Thank you.
Hey, Bob, could I ask you a question? Hey, Greg, could I ask Bob a question?
Well, absolutely. Craig, can you
I'm
include
bringing him
Bob?
back in? I apologize.
I'm sorry, I didn't get in quick enough.
I brought him back in as a panelist, but I think he may have dropped off the call.
That's all right.
Bob's here. Bob, if you could unmute yourself, please.
I can ask him later.
There he is.
Bob, in the park that you all just finished developing, what's the average size of that lot in that park that you all, would it take you 20 years or something to fill it up?
Yeah. Craig, is there a way we can let Jenna come in? Because she can answer with a lot more specificity.
Sure, with the chair's permission, I can do that.
Please do.
Yes, that's fine.
I just did it, Craig.
Jenna's on board. I see her. Jenna, if you can unmute.
Okay, here I am. Sorry.
Jenna.
That park has 7 tenants in it, and we developed it over 20 years. And the sizes of the lots vary, but none of the lots were smaller than 5 acres. So in our park guidelines, we set out that it needed to be 5 acres or greater, and that those companies in the park had to create new payroll per acre. So they weren't just moving from one park or another, but there's a couple 5-acre tracts, and then you've got a 25-acre tract, you've got a 15-acre tract, a 10-acre tract.
So total, how many acres? Was it 400 acres? What was it?
Oh, no,
Total.
it was small. It was 100 acres. And
It
to
was
start,
100 acres and you got 7, that's a lot of companies to have those big lots. Okay, thanks. I've been asked that question. I didn't know the answer.
yeah,
Thank you.
we didn't want to do small tracts. We wanted to do bigger tracts
I
for
understand.
higher paying manufacturers.
Okay, so it's a 100-acre tract and okay, I know the answer. Thank you.
And Frank, part of what we wanted to do is to grow those companies. So you take a big ass fans, instead of them having to go somewhere else to find that land capacity, we wanted to provide them with that. So they can grow. And that's a great example of one that, and all those companies out there have grown.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I just think that needs to be in the mix. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Jenna, very much.
Greg, I have a question that
Please,
either
ma'am.
to Jenna or to Bob. So I've not been out there, but these tracts of land, the usage, is it mostly kind of horizontal, low rise buildings? Are they 1 stories or are there multiple stories? How dense is the construction on these sites? And what is their use? Are they warehousing? Are they?
They're manufacturing.
Mhm.
We have Harbor Steel out there. We have Tiffany and Company polishing and setting diamonds. We have big ass fans, and they have 2-3 different buildings.
Mhm.
And they have a 2-story building out there, which is their world headquarters where they're doing all the engineering. And then they have the R&D facility where they're doing research and development. And then Wabasto Roof Systems has 2 buildings. The first one I think was 100,000 and the second one was maybe 150,000. So they've got 800 people out there doing sunroofs and roof systems for the automotive industry. And They actually just celebrated their 20-year anniversary about 2 years ago. Quito USA is out there, a small manufacturing company that is also on 10 acres. I might be forgetting. No, there's also a Chinese company out there called Bertley, and they're on 6 acres or less.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Thank you all. Craig, can you tell if there's any other questions from the public?
Yes, sir. There's 2 other speakers waiting. I'll bring in Richard Murphy first.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Richard.
Thank you very much. I'm a zoning and land use attorney here in Lexington. I just had one comment about land availability and the fact that land may be shown as available places it may not practically be available. And at the stakeholder meeting I went to, the example was used of expansion area 1, which you all discussed today, the Overbrook Farm. One person there, and I don't have anything to do with that property, but one person at that meeting stated that it was likely going to be 8 years before the sewer issues could be worked out on that farm and that development could start. And so my only request is that hopefully there'll be some mechanism in your final report that deals with the fact that some of these large parcels, this is about 600 acres, are not immediately available to absorb some of the residential increase that we're anticipating here. I'm sure they will be at some time, but they may not be for a few years, may not be during the life of the next comprehensive plan. So that was just my comment and my request that will be dealt somehow in your report.
Thank you, Richard, for your comment. We have had similar conversations, and we included in those conversations is whether the current owner it's desirable for them to develop it.
And those will all be put in a bucket together, the same identification as that.
Thank you. Craig, can you bring up the other person that raised their hand?
Certainly. The last speaker is Brittany Rothmeyer. I'll bring her into the meeting now.
Brittany, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
We'll
It's great to see all of you, and thank you to the presenters today. That was a really, really interesting presentation. I thought really well done, both the vacant land analysis and the CAP program and sewerability analysis, both very interesting and critical to this discussion. So thank you for that. I had a question about the industrial land depiction as well in the presentation that Cynthia made. And it goes to the points that Bob and Jen were making as well. I understand on the analysis of the vacant industrial land that Coldstream and the dairy farm land, the 250 acres that the city did acquire specifically for economic development and jobs, of which the 50 acres are, of course, shovel ready, and the other 200, the infrastructure is being worked on actively, I believe. Am I correct in thinking that that land was being considered transition land as opposed to being included in the vacant industrial analysis? It did feel like it was misleading as far as what was represented as available industrial land, because 250 acres is a many acres of land for that. I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding that depiction in Cynthia's analysis correctly.
Want me to answer the question?
Please do.
Okay, yes. Yes, Brittany, thank you. Yes, it's definitely included in the property in transition with an industrial zoning classification, but not included in the vacant industrial uses. So it's an additional 260 acres. Yes.
Okay, I see. And I guess,
I was just going to say it's an additional 260 acres for industrial uses.
Okay. Understood. Just wanted to clarify that, because of course, we know how critical the work that the chamber does for economic development, how critical payroll taxes are to our revenue streams as a city. And I would hope, that the entire community is anxious, of course, for the infrastructure to be developed on those extra 200 acres so that we do have a significant land availability for job development. So I'm hopeful that that the chamber and the city are working actively together on that to encourage that be shovel ready and available for jobs as soon as possible. So thanks for that information.
You're welcome. I guess I would just say, in addition to that, Brittany, I think by understanding what's currently vacant today, it sort of highlights the fact that there isn't a lot that's shovel ready for new employment today. So that's the point for keeping it separate.
Sure. Yeah, no, I understand that infrastructure certainly takes time. And I know, Fate Alliance is certainly supportive of that infrastructure planning that's going on. And like I said, I imagine our entire community is anxious for that to be prepared so that land is shovel ready as soon as possible, and we can get jobs and corporations out there ASAP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Are there any other question or anybody else with their hand raised?
No, sir. I'm not seeing any other hands raised in the attendees.
If there's no other panelist comments or questions, I'd like to entertain a motion that we adjourn. And if I could request that the Zoom be left on for a moment and that Dawn stay on.
Yeah.
For a moment after we adjourn formally. Is there a motion to
move to adjourn?
Councilperson Bledsoe and then Price Bell also. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye. Thank you, everybody, for a
Thank
great meeting.
Thank you all. Thank you. So we're formally adjourned.